semantic action on promoting semantic assets and experience, providing simplified and extensible reusable solutions. But what we will try to say, next slide please, is that we will try to, from now on forth, to tackle the semantic asset in a uniform manner, meaning that to try to address issues that are involve all vocabularies and to identify potential intersections between vocabulary. You all know about our solutions, not needed to repeat them. Next slide, please. Regarding the whole effort of harmonize all vocabularies provided by the Interoperable Action and the CEMIC group. We conducted the first webinar a few days ago, the 17th of October, and we tackled issues that were related to core location, to core public organization, and we introduced the new vocabulary for core public event. Today, the reason for having this the first webinar was also related to some issues that we are going to tackle here in the current webinar, and we felt the need to resolve issues on core location and core public organization in order to be able to better tackle issues that are related to core public service. We are planning a new webinar on the GitHub the 17th of November, and next year, the 26th of January, we are going to tackle the rest of the issues that are related to core person, core business, and core criterion and evidence. The whole effort is to try to go to apart, except from the public event, core public event vocabulary, to create a minor revision of the rest of the vocabularies, which tackle issues that couldn't, it was not feasible to be tackled during the latest major release that we performed, but also to the effort is to provide to harmonize all vocabularies and tackle potential inconsistencies between them. The outcome will be a consolidated diagram which will show the intersections, interconnections between all vocabularies. Next slide, please. So, under this context, and as I said before, that under the CEMIC action, we are tackling the list of all vocabularies, including CPSV-AP, as well as BREC DCAT-AP, so to accomplish a better management, the CEMIC asset, and avoid inconsistencies. So it was in terms of so GitHub space contains the CEMIC GitHub space contains also the issues that are related to CPSV-AP, catalog of services, as well as BREC DCAT solution and tools. Next slide, please. So I pass the floor to my colleague Emidio Stani to start presenting the issues that we are going to discuss today.
There was one question on the chat from Peter, whether there is a link to previous recordings. Are those links on JoinUp?
For the previous events, they are on JoinUp. But the one for the core vocabularies webinar that we had on the 27th of October, that one will be up this week. But normally you should get an email coming your way when it's up on YouTube.
Okay, so that's the question from Peter. So Emidio, just take it from here.
Thank you, Pauline and Max. Indeed, with all of you, we'll go to the first part of the issues that we're dealing with the CPSV-AP. CPSV-AP now reached version 3.0.0, and it's indeed a big model, including in the middle public service and public organization, which are highlighted in blue, and with different type of classes. You see highlighted in red those classes that we will discuss today, including on one hand the relation between agent and participation, the dataset part, events for the concept for the part of the control vocabulary, output, and also channel, and together with and also concession control. So we will see them in detail one by one. And the first issue that we talk here, it's about the cardinality, let's say the relation between an agent and an address. Now in CPSV-AP, indeed, an agent is already connected with the public service through the participation class, and an agent can have an address. However, the address is limited to one. In the current CPSV-AP, the request is to enlarge such cardinality in order for an agent to have more than one address. And the case here that we bring is the Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, which can have different addresses. So the idea is to at least to have more than one address in this data model in CPSV-AP. I don't know if there are any comment or question or
I have no comments. I have 3 + 1s, so 3 people are in agreement. If there are any people are not in agreement, just speak up,
yeah,
or give your comment or your suggestion. If not, then in a minute we'll just move on to the next issue. I keep on getting +1, so I'm getting the impression that people are generally in agreement.
okay.
So let's move on.
Yeah.
Next one.
We've seen already in the diagram that a public organization is the authority on the for the public service. Inside the public organization class, we do have a preferred label property, which is mandatory as and the cardinality of this property is 1-to-1. Now, if we see the other classes in the data model, we see that this title and description and names have one or minimum one and more than, let's say, and open, let's say, cardinalities in that sense, but with minimum one. The request is to enlarge the cardinality of preferred label for a public organization in order to allow different names in different languages, like in this case, the European Commission in all different languages. We need to say that also that preferred label comes from SCOS. However, and in this SCOS definition, a resource has no more than one value of SCOS preferred label per language tag. So in theory, you could already use it with multiple values. So we can of course provide examples in the usage note, that's for sure. The proposition indeed is to extend the cardinality unless you want to we can stick to one and only one. Saying that though in SCOS we have just one value per language tag, so we could stick to that. That's a bit more open on this point.
Any comments here? Georgia is in agreement.
So we enlarge the cardinality. Okay.
Yeah, I see also general agreement. Again, if you have any strong objections, any objections, put them in the chat. If not, I'm going to say again, there is no objections to the proposal for issue 99. And then we're happy to move on to the next one.
Yeah. This
there's just
issue,
there is a comment here from Matthias that to provide a clarification that the Scots pref label restriction, so one pref label per language, applies here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will do it in the usage note. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Within this issue, we deal with the relation, let's say, the class dataset. You see, it's related to a public service. And in the current definition, we have such sentence. This class represents a collection of metadata and where they can be found. For instance, on a regional public service portal, on a national e-government portal. Now, it's not clear, for example, within this sentence, the first part, where, for example, where they can be found. Now, the thing is, what we propose here mostly is, first of all, to reuse the original definition from DCAT, which means a collection of data published by a created single agent and for access and downloading one more representation, and reuse this the sentence, the current definition here of dataset in the usage note. So in a way, as we reuse the URI of a DCAT dataset to be strict in that conformance there. So the sentence that we use for the definition of dataset here, we just used for the usage note. That's in a way we try to be compliant, or at least more conform towards DCAT per se.
Question from Georgia: why do we use DCAT here?
Because in the past, it was the original work came from a pilot that we did with the Netherlands to express a dataset of public services. And that's why it was introduced a long time ago. Because basically the need of via API or via datasets that contains information about public services. That's the original reason.
So in that sense, it was a collection of data that was published. So.
If I can,
Georgia.
From my perspective, it doesn't make any sense because I understand the use case, but that use case applies to many other type of data, also for the public organizations, also for the business, also for the public event, also for you can create data sets also for the people, for all the type of data that we manage in the core public service, or in the core vocabularies, I mean. Mm-hmm. So, DCAT and DCAT AP is something that we have as a metadata layer for all the type of data, okay, that we manage. So I think that implicitly it will, in a certain way, when we define a data set, we always use the DCAT, in at least in Europe now, to do that. So I don't see the point to highlight in this specific core vocabulary the data set, apart from the use case that you had, because that use case, as I said, can be also applied to the core person, core public organization, and so on and so forth. So I would be uniform in this.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But the issue is indeed within concerning of the dataset is already there in version 3.0. Here it's mostly on the definition per se. Indeed, it could be applied to having a dataset could be applied to other vocabulary. Here it was brought in for CPSV-AP in particular for past reasons, and it's already there. The idea is to be more let's stick to the definition using from DCAT As the sentence per se, it's mostly let's say give a context in terms of public service, but it doesn't provide the definition per se of dataset.
Can we maybe, in this case, I understand what Georgia is saying, we'll either reuse it everywhere, or maybe we don't use it anywhere. One thing, well, it's here, it was here already. So we're not, I don't think we would want to remove it, but we may put an activity on our agenda to look at whether or not it would make sense to make it consistent across core galleries for the other ones as well. Would that be acceptable, Georgia?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I mean, this issue of the definition comes from the fact that, you know, if it is DCAT dataset, we need to reuse the definition of that vocabulary, right? And that's why I stress the comment that I have done.
Okay.
Could I also have a comment here?
Of course.
I think I agree with Jorga. I think it's kind of strange that we have a reference from the dataset level to its internals. I mean, if we have an air quality dataset with millions of rows of each measure of the air quality in a city, you would never expect every row to somehow reference back to the surrounding metadata description of the dataset as a whole. And actually, if you look at the model, the relation in the other direction just makes no sense at all. Why would we have a relation that says has part from the dataset to millions of entities corresponding to air quality measurements? It would just blow up the triple store.
Yeah. Okay,
so I think we should phase it out somehow, propose to phase it out, or make a comment that this is not necessary to have.
You mean just the reverse property, the has part?
I think both.
Both the dataset and the
is described at and the has part. Both relations should not be provided. It could be on another kind of description level. Maybe that should be in every kind of core vocabulary to say, if you want to describe a data set describing all the persons or all the public services, fine, do that. Please use DCAT datasets to do that in a catalog. But it's not necessarily part of the model in the same way. There does not need to have to be any relationships between the dataset, metadata of the dataset, and the individual data inside of the dataset.
Okay. Let me then just reformulate what we could do. We could look in more general at the appearance of the dataset here in this core vocabulary and see what we can do in the future, as Matthias said, possibly make more a general statement that you can use the DCAT dataset if necessary, but not included in the model. Well, one thing that we could do is we could also look at current usages of the CPSV to see if actually those links are being used or not. So I think that would be something that we would make sure that we're not breaking people's implementations, or at least provide that information in any guidance that we want to provide.
I think that is a really good suggestion. And why this is important is not necessarily because it does hurt anyone, right, as it is now, in more than the sense that it is confusing. People will not understand the metadata models the right way if you have this relation.
So let's do that. We'll just investigate and then maybe provide some guidance information of this usage, and potentially not having necessary the inclusion of dataset in the model. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, can we move on?
This issue it's about the identifier of a dataset per se. If we look at this identifier property, which appears in different classes of the model, the cardinality it's one-to-one, except for datasets where the identifier is minimum 0 and open to asterisk, open to. It indeed it was requested why let's say the cardinality is open. And the first thing is this issue comes from, let's say, the identifier property comes from dataset per se. It's related from the dataset class. So, and it comes also with the discussion of the guideline on the identifier. There's been in DCAT-AP, there's been a guideline on this, where indeed the usage of identifier as a strategic point. So if of course we keep DCAT dataset in this model, then the discussion is for this issue is to keep the cardinality open, as different identifier could be used for dataset per se.
Matthias, can you just say, is your comment here on this issue 84, or was it still on issue 103?
I just meant that from the previous discussion we had, that the dataset does not necessarily need to be part of this model. It's on another level. We do not need to define which properties you have on the DCAT dataset. It's defined in the DCAT-AP specification or application profile. So the discussion is moot. We don't need to discuss it here.
Okay. But your comment was not about this issue 84 that's on the screen now.
Oh, I mean that, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
If we delete it from the model, then we don't need to talk about identifiers of datasets.
Yes. Why don't we need to talk about all of the other metadata properties we have on the DCAT dataset here? Okay. Why is just 84? Why not? I mean, we will have like 50 issues if we want to discuss all of the properties missing on DCAT dataset here. There are many optional fields on dataset.
Yeah,
basically what you're also saying is on the issue 103, if we decide not to include it, then this whole point goes away.
Exactly.
Okay. So is that the conclusion, that we don't want to discuss this here? And we don't have a resolution, we just
I totally agree with Matthias, really, totally.
Okay.
Okay.
So the counter proposal is that we do not discuss issue 84.
Okay.
At least not until you have made a decision whether DCAT dataset should be part of the model or not, for some reason.
Okay. Can I proceed over? Yeah. Within CPSV-AP, we do have, it's linked also to the other somehow the discussion dataset. That's why the three issues are one after each other. It's about, let's say, output and evidence in relation to a dataset per se. It was highlighted with the relation between evidence and datasets coming from core criterion evidence, where evidence is a subclass of a dataset, while output is not. Evidence and output are indeed two direct classes connected to public service. Here it's, let's say, the question is why not output should be also a subclass of the dataset per se. If we look at the definition that I report here on the slide, you see that they are similar as type of definitions. However, not necessarily all the output could be used as an evidence for another public service. And so that's why it's an open question here. First of all, what are the needs? If we want to reuse datasets property or not, or is there anything else, let's say, that it could be even outside the concept of dataset per se. But what is the real need of doing this simply? I think these issues was opened by Jim Young. Jim, if you're there, you of course feel free to.
Yes, thanks. You had those two questions. Where are the needs? Reusing? Yes, reusing is a major reason for discussing this issue. If an output could be a subset of data set. So that's our need to reuse.
And my question would be, are all outputs DCAT data sets, or are there also outputs that are not DCAT data sets?
Yeah, but the same question could also be asked for the evidence. It's actually a discussion about what a data set is. Ref the previous discussions, what are data sets?
Okay, but we're not discussing the subclassing of the evidence class, I think, are we?
Yeah, those two things are similar.
Okay.
Evidence version 3.0.0 is a subset of a data set.
Okay, good. Okay. So the proposal, and I see Matthias and Georgia with their hands up. Matthias first.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so the effect of having this subclass, I think someone wrote that in the comments on the GitHub as well, would mean that every output, every individual actual output, be it a PDF document or some kind of document, would in itself be a data set. And you could argue that it is a good approach. I would say it's not. A document in itself would not be what I consider a whole data set. It's not regular in the same way I would consider environmental measures of the quality of air or something like that. It's a document. So I would say a data set contains a collection of things of a regular character. A document in itself is therefore less good as a data set, I would argue.
Okay, Georgia. Georgia?
Can you hear me? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree once again with Matthias, because I think if I think to possible public service, if a public service generates a birth certificate, for example, do you really think a birth certificate to be a data set? I don't think so at all. Can
I just interrupt there?
Yeah.
I think we're not going to discuss what is a data set or not. That's something
Exactly.
that DCAT has established, that a data set is very vague. And
Yeah, exactly.
if you say that
Exactly.
in your case or in Matthias that a document is not a data set, I don't think that is supported by the opinion of the group that developed DCAT. But that is, so let's not talk about that. I think what we're talking about here is the way of subsetting something to DCAT dataset needs to be predicated on that you actually want to reuse some of the properties of the DCAT dataset. I don't think we want to discuss whether a document is a dataset or not, because that's sort of outside of
Yeah, but from my perspective, the output of a public service is not a data set, and it has, by the way, some different properties. And also the input of a public service, which is here an evidence. And here I have another issue that probably is not the case for this issue, but I don't understand why in the application profile of a core vocabulary we change the class. The class in the core vocabulary was input, not evidence, but anyway, probably they are equivalent, these two classes. Also, from my perspective, the evidence is not a subclass of dataset. That's what I'm saying. And based on the discussion we have done before, that dataset probably here is probably not really appropriate to be included. I don't see the point to have these subclasses for both, or output and evidence. And I agree that if it applies to the evidence, Probably it applies also to the output.
Jim?
Yeah, yes, that's the point. One of the point also Georgia said now. Those two classes should be handled equally. The other thing that we discussed nationally is that for public services, you have to sort of have to document every decision. The documentation of the decision should be made available as open data sets. So although it should be, it could be a physical thing that you get as an output of the service, it should be documented electronically, the decision. The passport, for instance, you get the passport, the physical passport, but the decision should be made electronically, also available as data sets.
But I think that goes without saying. What we're talking about here is metadata, and we're not talking about the actual paper document or something like that.
Right, right.
But what I hear people saying is that, in general, the subclassing of both evidence and output is not necessary, or maybe not even useful. Would that be a conclusion of the group, that we just remove the subclassing of both of them?
Yes, because what we want to do is that we want to collect all evidence and output and describe them as one data set as a whole. All metadata about all output can be considered a data set. Not every output and every evidence is a data set.
No, but for let's say the simple proposal would be to remove the links between the subsetting, the subclassing of evidence and output to dataset.
Yes.
Does what consequences would that have in Medio? Would you have a view on that?
This relation comes from core criterion evidence. The relation of subclass between evidence and dataset per se. So definitely this will have I would say an impact on core criterion evidence. We will have a webinar on this, so we can deal with this during that webinar. As far as I know, I don't have other clue on who's using the evidence as a dataset per se, in terms of really in operational way. I don't know if there are I don't know others, let's say, needs. I don't know. This I don't know.
So it's again related to issue 103, where there was the point we say we don't need the subclassing to the data set. This is sort of an extension of that, so we'll have to see about the usage of it. But at this point in time, I think what I've heard from the people who have expressed an opinion, that they think it's not necessary to do the subclassing. Jim, you still have your hand up, or is it a new one?
Yes, we have the need to be able to refer to a data set as an evidence, and also the other way to say that something you produce are data sets. So it's the other way. Maybe we should have data set is subset of evidence and a subset of output. Something you produce are data sets. Something you use as evidence are data sets. Because again, we want to reuse.
Yeah, you want to reuse the properties that are defined for.
No, reuse the data sets that are already available. For instance, birth certificates as data sets available. So you can connect from the service to say that one of the evidence is birth certificate.
Okay. So,
Jim, sorry, do you have a data set per each birth certificate, or do you have a data set that includes all the birth certificate of your country?
It's a register, but in order to perform the one particular service, it's an individual person, not the whole register. So I'm not sure what your question is about.
It's again, I think, a modeling issue. Some people think that a data set is sort of a collection of records of people, for example, But you could also say that the data set is the data for one person, and the register is a catalog. So, but that's a question of modeling. I think in this case, it was clear that the link that we're talking about, the subclassing, is about an individual set of data for a particular person or a particular service. That's what I think that's the idea behind it. And the question becomes whether there needs to be explicit link to the description of the data set.
Max, can I have a comment here?
Yeah.
You do not want to have a long discussion of what data sets are. I agree, it's a hard question. But what we see now, the consequence of this loose definition of what data set is, causes a lot of modeling headaches. In this case, we thought we would like to have the GitHub-AP to be able to support data portals in Europe. Now, with this approach, we would have, how many citizens do you have in Norway nowadays? Is it 6, 7 millions? We would have 6 or 7 millions of data sets just to cover all of the birth certificates. Clearly, this is not a good strategy for finding anything in a data portal. Therefore, we need to, at some point, be more pragmatic for what we consider being a data set, not just because it's modeling nicely.
No, Matthias, let me try to. This is not something that we can solve here. I think, like everything, it depends on what your view is. I think a whole database of person records could be seen as a data set, but there are other applications where you could actually see a single record for a person as a data set inside the catalog.
So that was possible.
Let's not discuss that, because I think this is a discussion we can have for a couple of hours. And let's say that we have here this issue of the subclassing of outputs and evidences as subclasses data set. We have decided, I think, that we need to do some homework looking at how it's being used and if it's not being used. And in general, I think the consensus was that it's not necessary to do that. And I think if Jim has the requirement to link to something that is a data set, it could be a more general link to a data set or to anything else. So it would be more general than data sets, because there are cases where those things are not data sets, but other things, like paper documents or whatever. So I would say let's keep the discussion here that we're going to look at this issue and seeing if it is possible to remove the explicit link to the dataset, and then we come back to you.
Yes.
Is it okay?
It's very good. And I just want to emphasize also that there are other good existing properties that can be used to link instance level to some kind of collection level metadata descriptions, like described by RDFs, something like that. Or there's more.
But that's a different issue.
Thinking about this, just a small note, then indeed, concept of collection, I think it's more generic enough, maybe, but we will look at it. I go next slide then.
There's a question from Gerard in Luxembourg who asked how that relates to the single digital gateway regulation and the definitions that are there in it. And I think that's something that, Emilio, you have had a look at.
For SDG, in terms of evidence and output, it was well, this class came already before SDG. So there we look to improve the definition of evidence output. We could look at if we want to improve, let's say, the definition over there. If I don't know if they are really explicitly defined, what is in there.
But I think we have a slide again on comparison of the CCV evidence and the one here. Is that correct? Maybe we'll get to that later.
We will talk about evidence. No, not evidence and output. Not in this.
Okay. Okay, good.
Not yet.
May I just just on the evidence and single digital gateway regulation? In the single digital gateway regulation, the notion of evidence is slightly more restricted towards the regulation aspect, whereas in the CCCEV, there it's a much broader notion. Actually, it can be beyond the notion of what is in the single digital gateway. So it might be encompass more elements into it. So it's a bit broader there.
Okay. So let's move on to the next one.
Yeah. This is indeed a question concerning, I would say, in general channel. A public service can be provided in different ways and different means through a channel class. The channel class is generic enough indeed to accommodate different kind of needs. However, the question is okay, if I want to specify an email address when the channel type is an email, or on home page, or URL when the channel type is a home page, how we can do it? The generic approach indeed is to extend the channel class to other property or subclasses, of course. And the question is also, okay, what are the channels often used by member states? I've seen the issue was brought from at the beginning from Jimmy Young, but somebody else also commented on this issue. And so I was wondering, are there any, let's say, channel that you want to describe most? That's the idea. Because so far, indeed, the channel class is generic enough. It's kept generic enough to allow to a different type of extension.
Any comments, any suggestions here? So,
I mean, Max, sorry,
yeah.
I would say that I will leave the class only, giving the possibility to member states to extend with their own types of channel. You can do like subclasses, for example, like email is a type of channel, which has typically the value, okay, or the website is another channel, which is can be with an URL and something like that. Or you can also have the type property in the channel. I don't know if you already have the here. I don't read it very well. I don't remember.
Yes, it's
already there. Okay. So with that type, you can have like a list of type of channels that you can use. I think this is enough.
Well, what we have now is there are a couple of things like an identifier, description, opening hours, processing time, and the type. So I don't know if you're suggesting, Georgia, to take all those out and leave the box empty, or that it's okay to leave those ones. They seem to be quite general, and then allow people to extend it. The other thing is, I think if there is an idea that channels could be, that email and website channels are very common, then there might be a case that we just add those two. Otherwise, people are going to find their own properties for that, and then the interoperability across services and across countries will disappear. What's the opinion on that?
I think that this class is sufficient from my perspective, okay? And these two ways of modeling with the type property or with subclasses of the different types of channel, including, for example, Sebastian is saying fax. So telephone can be another class, subclass of channel that identifies a telephone, and then there you specify whether it is voice or fax. I think it's the way to model here. In Italy, I think we have both. We have the type of the channel, but also subclasses. And vCard, in this sense, can be used. For example, there are in vCard classes identifying the type of channels that can be used.
So your proposal is to leave it as it is, and then leave the member states the possibility to extend it any way they want.
Yeah, you can provide, for example, some guidelines, as it has been done, for example, for the contact point in the DCAT or something like that. So provide guidelines so that member state can follow the guidelines, but leave them the possibility to use these two ways of modeling this type of channels.
What would the alternative be? To add like FOF mbox and FOF homepage, but that would turn the channel into an agent, which is perhaps not, or should we invent new properties just to have to cover that case and also use the type then, as perhaps as Jorga said, in combination?
Or use vCard.
Instead of channel? Oh, you mean like pointing to a vCard?
Yeah, to vCard email and vCard URL, something like that. But that would be then, as Georgia proposes, sort of a guideline of how to do that if you want to do it.
Yeah.
We could, I don't remember now by heart the usage node, but we could look the usage node of the channel class to see if we can provide better example.
Okay.
Are there has web page or something like that from vCard that can be used? Homepage.
I think it's vCard URL, or there is a field where you can put in the URL of the page where you're where you go.
Use the has version where you can qualify it as well, perhaps.
But let's look at the guidance note and what we can say there about how you could do that.
Is there a list of types for the channel already? Could that be extended with something similar, or so we avoid the so-called?
I don't know if there is a general list. I see people in the chat already saying what in Finland and in Portugal that have types of channels, and I see in Finland e-channel, printable form, phone, service location, and web page. So that's, but I don't know if there. I don't have that here in mind, whether there is something at the EU vocabularies, for example, on channels.
By looking at the usage note, so far the recommendation is to look, if possible, to the Europass standard list of communication channel types. This is code list, which includes 6 values like post, email, mobile phone, fax, web, and phone. I can imagine, I can expect that maybe there might be even more.
Okay. Okay, so
we can extend the usage node, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I go next then.
May I? May I
Please,
ask a question? When we raised this issue, it was not about the type, but the actual address. If you say that the service type is email, what is the email address? It's okay to use subclass, but which property should we use to specify the address? Email is a subclass of a channel, it's okay. But which property in the class, which is now, to use in order to say the email address for this particular service? So it's not about the type, but the actual address. When you say online, where is the web address to that service, etc.?
Jim, we just discussed that we could have to use in the usage note or in a guideline to use these vCard ones that Matthias just put in the chat. The proposal of Georgia was more to leave it open for member states to decide by themselves. But I think
but where is the interoperability?
In the middle, Jim, if you want me to, in the middle of that, we want to do a guideline that describes what Matthias just put in the chat. to use vcard has URL and vcard has email.
The interoperability
Okay.
stays at the channel level, you see, to
Yeah.
give at least the possibility to, with a certain property, to describe the concept of channel. That's where it is. And if we agree that to stay only with the channel and not to go into subclasses, then we stick to this. But we try to at least to address some needs in order to extend the channel.
Yeah. So the proposal is to revise the usage node and include a suggestion to use vcard properties. Is
Okay.
it okay with you, Jim?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I go next one.
Yeah.
This issue is about the unalignment with the core public organization, which we discussed in the previous webinar. In the previous webinar, we agreed to move, let's say, a contact point to have to link a contact point with the opening hours and availability restriction towards a temporal entity class. And the idea is, the request is like for contact point, make channel having a relationship towards the temporal entity for normal opening hours. So because as you can see in the current diagram, which is really in the middle there, you have contact point towards opening hour specification, but also channel has a relation towards opening hour specification. So then we would like to keep the same type of relations, opening hours and the availability restriction towards temporal entity, like we do for contact point. So we are aligned with the core public organization vocabulary.
I see Matthias in agreement. Basically, it's an alignment between vocabularies, and it's also the possibility for channel to specify the opening hours and also the closing hours, basically. I see more +1s coming in. So we would say that the proposal is agreed for, unless there are people who already have objections, then we'll put issue 86 agreed. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Right
then,
time.
yes, indeed, right in time for a 5 minutes break.
Okay, we'll meet again at 4:05.
Yes.
Grab a coffee.
We can have a coffee and then go to the next part on the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, so we reconvene. Row 5. Emilio, you want to move on?
Let's move on.
Emilio?
Yes, I was on mute. I removed. Yeah. Okay. Welcome to the second part on the issue CPSV-AP. We will deal with certain issues left, and also on the last part on the control vocabulary. Within this issue, we deal with, let's say, a better distinction between what is a public service, between public service description and execution. So far, we've discussed, even in the issue before, the link between public service and evidence. Usually, you have an evidence as an instance of ID card, for example, so you have a particular instance of an evidence, but you could have also descriptions of it, let's say a generic type of evidence. Now, for example, this public service provides ID cards, but not exactly that instance, let's say that particular ID card of a person. So the proposition here is to add a direct relation between a public service and the evidence type. Evidence type is already a concept that comes from core criterion evidence, to allow a better distinction between public service description and execution. So then we need to add a new relation. In this case, is proposed as evidence type between a public service and evidence type to support this use case.
So is that clear to people? The fact that public service will link to an evidence type in the model. And thereby reusing the evidence type class in the core criterion and core evidence vocabulary.
But sorry, in the diagram there is as input that goes to evidence type.
This diagram comes from the person that provided, let's say, the suggestion. Yeah.
Okay.
There is what I provide as an example as evidence type as a relation, because we already have the as input towards evidence. So I believe it's better to distinguish as input and with evidence type in terms of naming of the relation. So distinct, one goes towards evidence and one goes towards evidence type.
But is input the right word here?
And that's why the proposition is to use as evidence type instead of as input, because as input it's already used for evidence.
Okay, so the diagram is not what we're proposing. The proposition is the bottom that has evidence type from the public service to the evidence type. I think that would solve your issue, I think, Georgia.
Yes, but yeah, I have another issue regarding this input class, which is in CPSV.
But that's not what the issue is about here.
Yeah, I understand. But in the input class, is there like a type? So I mean, if the input is an evidence, the evidence in CEV has the property connected with the evidence type, right? Do you understand me?
I think that's the second bullet point. The two bullet points here is that you have a generic type, which is the evidence type. And if you're executed, you need to have the input, which is the real evidence for a particular person. Emilio, is that the idea?
That's it's to better distinguish, because there is already evidence type in coordinated evidence. So the idea is we use one for generic description of evidence. Let's say any ID cards. It's could be an evidence type and instance of ID. Yeah, that's the idea.
So a question, what I think Jorga already asked this, but maybe to clarify, the relation between an evidence and the evidence type is a property. It's not RDF type. Is it some other DC terms type or some other relation?
CPSV evidence.
From okay, maybe
It's is conformal to.
Okay.
So an evidence in CCCV is conformal to an evidence type.
Then maybe it could be called evidence conformance or something like that. Evidence type, or has evidence type is probably okay. What is the content of evidence type? Is it only a reference to a code? Then in that case, it seems a bit over the edge. Isn't it enough to point directly to the classification? If not, there is a formal RDF type relation between the evidence and evidence type. I'm just thinking whether we are modeling something too complex here.
The usage of evidence type has to be seen mostly as a code list in many cases. But you see here a class because in CCCV there was need to describe some more conditions and some aspects about the code, so the type itself on the abstract level. That's the reason why this evidence type classification exists additionally. So therefore, it's a class. But in the usage, in most usages, like here in public service, you could consider this as a code list.
Okay, but it clearly makes sense to point to evidence type instead of evidence from public service. I agree fully with that. So maybe the discussion whether evidence type a class or a code list or not is beyond the scope of today. So then I guess it's correct the way you are suggesting it. Or my perspective is correct, that it is correct.
Any other comments? If not, the proposal to have evidence type pointing to an evidence type, I think I feel there is agreement. I don't see any objections to it.
The only thing is whether has evidence type is a good name for a property. But if the relation is called conforms, maybe it should evidence conform to. Maybe it's too long. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, has evidence type is sort of the standard way of pointing to a class in many cases. So let's use that as the working title of it, unless anybody has input type, but then you're linking evidence to inputs, and I don't know if that's in all cases correct. Emilio, what do you think?
No.
Linking this to input type?
Input type to use as a relation.
Suggestion is to not use has evidence type, but has input type, which I say is it links two things together, evidence and inputs, and I don't know if that's correct here.
It's fine. I would say we can take it. There is no strong opinion on this. The important thing that we create such relation.
Okay, so is there, then you're suggesting to change this proposal to has input type?
It's fine for.
But I don't have, there's only one suggestion. Georgia says agreement with has input type. Matthias, so that's, I think, if there are other people, if there are any objections to has input type, please say so. Then I'm noting down that we have an agreement on a link which is called as input type. Yeah. Then move on.
Okay. This issue concerns a bit the agent, let's say, with the participation class. So you see that participation class is used in CPSV-AP. Recently, we introduced, let's say, we reused participation more in core public event. The request during the first webinar, there was already some sort of suggestion. There was a suggestion to create a relation from participation towards an agent. There is already from agent towards a participation. And there is a recent request as well needed to add such a relation. So to describe better the relation between from participation to agent class. So the inverse relation will be maybe as participant. We can, of course, you can tell me if as there could be better meaning on this naming. But indeed, we want to specify that there is an inverse relation of from to plays role, as you can see now, from agent towards participation.
Okay.
A question. Isn't there a place role in the V3C ontology, org ontology? Place role points to then something that is a role. Is participation a role? I'm just thinking of the semantics here.
The organization ontology.
V3C organization ontology. I think there is a place role there somewhere. Maybe I'm remembering wrong, so I'm checking.
I don't know.
Might be.
Yeah, there is a reification called membership, which
Yeah.
is slightly different probably from participation. I think we need to fix some cardinalities here, otherwise it doesn't work, this reification. Because it's many too many, many too many. So a reification in a certain way should be to one agent, okay? So one agent participates probably with more than one role to one public service. It's a matter of verification stuff.
So you're Georgia, you're referring to as participant, the cardinality of as participant, the new relation that we're proposing.
Yeah, I think so.
So we should
I
restrict
think
to
that
one.
the participation is of an agent to a public service, okay? With many roles, probably, if we keep this role stuff here 0n. So if so you are saying simply that an agent participates in a public service typically, but at least one should be there, otherwise it doesn't work, I think, the verification.
Which one do you want to have? One?
Surely has, how do you suggest, as participant.
As participant.
We should restrict to 0-1. Okay.
It should be even one.
Yes, one. Assuming that you don't want to describe many participants using one participation instance. But I'm assuming that is not the case, or? Are you talking about having the participation, if you are having an event or something and you have a participation and then you says the following people participated and you have a description and then you point to all of these agents. Is that the case, or is it one per user?
That was the original idea, but I don't know. I don't know if there are other people.
I will tell you the cardinalities, but I think that for reification, this is a reification, right? You are trying to the pitch represents, the fact that there is an agent participating in one public service at a certain time, okay, probably with the role, okay? If we have to do that, we need to pay attention to these cardinalities, otherwise it doesn't work. And this was one of the issues raised also in the e-procurement ontology. They people working there, they didn't want to use this class because of these cardinalities, because it was in fact an issue, okay? Because participation is for one agent to the public service, okay? And then you have another agent, you have another participation instance, and so on and so forth. So you have many different participation according to the different agents participating in the public service with different roles in different time period, typically.
And you're also saying that maybe that one agent only plays one role for public servants.
Well,
or you could have more than that.
I think you can also have more than one.
And you can have none.
Some, but at least, well, if you want to say that the participation is with the specific role, at least one role should be there.
Yeah. Okay.
But probably more.
So I would say we can create the as participant relation, but for time being we restrict to one-to-one. That's on this we could agree.
Yeah. And then also the place role, one to many.
One to many.
Because it doesn't actually make sense to play no role.
Okay.
So if I capture this as participation 1-1 and place role 1-2. Yep. Any objections to that?
Only the name of the property again. Place role, I'm not sure. Why not call it role instead of participation in that case, if the sole idea of that class is to capture the role? And if it's not only the role, then it shouldn't be place role, then it should be participates or something.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with Matthias. It's not place role because you're not playing, you place the role on the public service, but then here you are describing the participation with some role to that public service. So participates probably, or as participant. No, as participant is the other one. Yeah. Participates.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I go to the next then.
Yeah.
Yes, this is a bit linked with the other slide. It's still the relation between public service and agent. In the request, it's observed that there is a strong indeed relation between a contracting authority providing a service, and it also there should be a strong relation between a public service and an agent per se. So an agent to which a public service is provided to. So that's the idea is to make more explicitly such relation between, especially with supporting public service execution, I would say, between public service and an agent. In this case, the relation would be is provided to. That's the request.
I don't understand.
No, I don't see it here.
I don't understand why you are pointing to an individual or to an organization and saying it's provided to, where the examples is directed towards doctors or another group of people. Agent does not correspond to a group.
No, it will be directly to directly to either a person or to an organization, etc. Yeah, it will be directly to an individual. Yeah, it will be directed to an individual. So this public service is directly. It's indeed for public service execution. So I supposing that you do have. I'm taking an example. Trying to take an example. You have a chatbot through which you provide a service, and this service is provided directly to a person. Myself directly. So you have a straightforward relation towards the public service, distance of the public service, and an agent person, an instance of the agent.
So I understand that could be done. I'm just saying when I read the issue from Siginis, it says that the profile of a consumer group for instance, elderlies, doctors. So the potential consumer, not an explicit consumer, it's more like an indication of who the public service is directed towards. And then you shouldn't point to an individual or even an organization. You should point to something that corresponds to a group of people in a specific profession or something like that.
I have the next issue about this, Matthias.
Yeah.
We could relate the two. If you want, I can go to the next one, and then we can discuss both of them. Huh?
Yeah, if we let's not solve the wrong thing.
Yeah. If it's okay for the rest of people, I go to the next one.
We can always come back if necessary.
Yes. So you see, in this issue, it was there was a discussion to see to this let's say describe who are the addressee to, let's say, to whom this public service is addressed to. And so when we are talking about a group of people or group of, let's say, of entities or agents, in that case, the example that was coming, like I want to address to citizens, business, etc. So in this proposition for this issue here, either there could be two different options. So let's say one is could be alternative to the other one. Either do we add indeed a property for addressee as a code list, as a property for public service, or add a member of, let's say, add a group, as you can see in option 2. In which an agent is a member of it. You know, from FOF we can reuse already the group concept in which an agent is a member for. So the two indeed are a bit straightforward. The first issue was concerning to directly to an instance. Here it's about indeed categories of either individuals, citizens, or business to whom the public service is addressed to. So they are a bit different, the two issues, but they deal with the relation towards an agent, let's say, in general.
Okay, any comments there?
So looking at the FOF group, I haven't looked at it very carefully, but it seems to focus on the direction, providing an explicit list of members. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
I'm right?
Yeah.
Okay. Then maybe this is not very concrete way. You don't want to point out a list of members of a group. You want to describe the characteristics of a group of people. If FOF group is a good way of doing that, then I'm all for using FOF group. If it's not, then I prefer some kind of addressee which points to a, well, then we have to define a lot of codes corresponding to different, I don't know, let's use categories of professions or something.
I don't know, let's say that in the original issues was really to distinguish in the let's say in the context of SDG, business and citizen, for example. That's the main thing, let's say, as far as I can see. The two top groups, business and citizen. So that's why the idea is to have some sort of distinction that way, let's say, as a code, either as a code or as a group. I mean, I don't know if
there is already a code list for that, which is called the EU vocabulary target audience, which has like children, consumers, education, general public. It doesn't have any businesses, but there's the start of a list of that. Those are sort of the general classes of audiences.
Okay.
Does this work? So does it work for you? Because you had a comment in the chat about the intention of the group of people.
Yeah. So that was issue 96, which Emilio provided as a link to an individual person or individual business, but Dimitris says the intention was to have this group of people and not the individuals.
Okay, then we stick to okay, for issue 96, I would say we can close it in a way that it's 79 that replies to that type of issue.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then Matthias said if Volvo Group can actually provide that functionality, then we can use that. Are there any other opinions on that?
There is a vocabulary we use in DCAT for categorization of publishers. We have in it's like companies, industrial consortium, national authority, regional. Maybe it's on the organization level.
That's only for publishers.
Yeah, I was just thinking whether it could be reused, but maybe it's not persons, more organization focused.
Yeah, and I think probably for public services there must be something that is already used by implementers of public services. And as Emilio said, the biggest difference is between citizens and businesses. There might be others. So is that something that we could discuss with the publications office in the context of their target audience vocabulary to see if that can be extended?
I think this is the best solution, because otherwise there is also confusion between the consumer that you said before and this addressee, because as Rita says, addressees is a potential consumer, but in this case it's a category, it's a type, a categorization of audience, exactly, or user type, okay, user target, while in the other case is exactly that consumer, so a specific agent. So that's why I think option one it's better, probably with different also naming from my perspective. And this vocabulary is definitely something to investigate.
Okay.
So we could go for option one, I would say, to introduce a property for public service in that sense. Or maybe we can rename it in a
one possibility that I thought of is we could use the Dublin core audience.
Dublin core audience.
Which is already there. And is actually specifically for providing information about the type of audience.
Okay.
Very good suggestion. I agree.
Okay. Let's do that. So that's issue 79 and 96, both to use audience.
Max, I put a comment in the chat and raised the hand. I'm not sure whether this will lead us to differentiating between business and public service, which my understanding is very hard.
So you're actually questioning the design of that controlled vocabulary, of that code list, to do it in a way that actually has the right terms there.
Yes, or to avoid separating business and public service. Yeah.
If that makes sense, if it makes sense to do that, then the vocabulary could provide that possibility. But that's basically the design of the controlled vocabulary that we need to look at. Okay.
Will we restrict to the a code list provided by the publication office, or will we have it open for defining your own codes if you don't find one that isn't fulfilling your needs?
That's always the case. That's always the issue, I think, Matthias, that we can find a list that does more or less what you want, but there might also be cases where you need to have additional ones. So I think we could probably have a recommendation to use one of the publication office, which in the actual fact at the moment is not really doesn't have the elements that we need. So in fact, we would need to talk to the publication office about that, and then in any case, it would be open for people to use their own audience list. But it would, of course, for interoperability, it would be better to have one list that covers the requirements for public services across Europe.
Very good. I agree. Just a very brief comment. It would be very nice to have some kind of guidance somewhere, how you extend an existing vocabulary provided by the publication office, how to use SCOS to relate to via the match properties to extend one or complement it using broader match and stuff like that.
But that's a little bit above the scope of what we're doing today.
I know. Just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, would be something that you're proposing as maybe a work item for CEMIC to look at in terms of guidance across core vocabularies.
Yes.
I see Jim is in agreement with that. So let's put that on our list for extra work. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And go on next then. A concession contract. So in this issue, it's an issue that comes a bit with let's say together with the procurement ontology concerning the concession contract. In CPSV-AP 3.0, the concession contract was introduced with a certain definition. This definition came directly from the directive of the EU on any procurement, and it got also its own URI. And the procurement ontology was released, let's say, just afterward with the inclusion of the concession contract per se. So we have, let's say, two different URI with slightly also different definitions per se, because in e-procurement, a contract, as you can see, a contract is between one or more buyers. We don't have the concept of buyers here in CPSV-AP, on one or more economic operator, giving the right to the economic operator to exploit the rights in between in a contract, which may include the receipt of payments. The definition from CPSV-AP, as I said, comes directly from the directive. The idea was to include contracts for the provision, as highlighted there, the provision on the management of services. So there is a delegation basically given by the contracting authority towards another contract entities for the execution of such services. Over there, then the proposition is for time being, let's say, to keep the URI as we have, because the definition for us, it's for us within the context of CPSV-AP is the dimension of services, which is really important for in the case of CPSV-AP. That's the proposition, and eventually we could create a relation between the two URI, the two concepts, if there is really a need, of course.
Comments? You put the previous slide on so we can see.
Yes, please.
What the definitions are.
Why do we need to introduce here the concession contract? It's in the procurement ontology, it makes sense, okay. But here we have the participation and the role, okay. So, which is much better, by the way, with respect to the procurement ontology from my point of view in terms of modeling. So why we need just the contract here, okay? Because we need to understand, we need to say that a public service is based on a concession contract?
Yeah, it was in the past. It was requested to describe how, let's say, a service is provided, and sometimes it happens, and we've discussed this, for example, in Spain, where energy, let's say, services concerning energy provision was delegated to private company businesses. No? So the idea was indeed, that's why it was introduced concession contract to satisfy such needs. So where a public service is delegated to economic operator for the provision per se. So that's what happened, let's say.
But we already modeled that with the participation, right? without having the contract.
We in the CPSV-AP there is a concession contract per se. It's a class that was provided within the latest release, which was subclass, and it was already subclass of e-procurement contract at the time.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just asking if we need this additional class that is, by the way, already managed in the e-procurement ontology, because we already have this model, not the contract itself, but we already have the indication that a public service can be done in concession because of the participation. You can express this with the participation part. You have a role which is a concessionaire, you have, in that case, a business, okay, on that public service. Probably the right holder of that public service is a public organization, and so you already have captured this and you don't need a contract itself. That's what I'm saying.
Well, yes, there you would, through the participation, you will depict how an agent, or in general an agent, will participate through the public service. Over here, it's different concept, because here it's about the contracting part, which is supposed to be a public contract per se, with an economic operator. As you can see, the relation it's toward an organization over there. So it's the difference is how you do it. There in the participation is okay, you do it, and how you do it through a concession contract.
But can I just say the issue is not about remodeling. The issue is there was a request whether we should point to the concession contract in the procurement ontology rather than having the one that is already defined for public service. And I think the proposal is, because the definitions are different, we're not going to move to point to the other. But we're not at this point looking at remodeling CPSV by modeling a concession contract as a participation. I think, but that's
no, I'm not saying to model the concession contract through the participation. I'm just saying that I don't see the need here to put a contract, okay, regarding this concession. But anyway, in this case, I would point to the e-procurement ontology, because it is there better described from my perspective.
Well, what Emilio said on the previous slide is that the definition that we have comes from the directive, and what the e-procurement ontology has created a new definition. So that's.
But that is the definition of.
That's a dilemma. The CPSV one comes from the directive. Straight.
Yeah, but it should be also the e-procurement ontology. All the definitions should come from the procurement directive.
That doesn't happen. That didn't happen.
Okay, so I would suggest then to coordinate with the e-procurement ontology group and try to understand this. I mean, it's because the concession contract is really something related to the procurement. It makes sense that is within an overall modeling of the procurement, right?
Yeah. So your suggestion is that we get in contact with the people who do the procurement ontology and ask them the question, why did they not use
absolutely,
the definition
absolutely.
If they had, then we would be able to point to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, let's.
So we have two classes with two different URIs, and we want to merge them, if preferably in the long term. Maybe we could just deprecate one for the time being, use same as.
Yeah. Well, same as is danger, of course, because the definition is different. So there's more related than same. But let's just have the conclusion that we need to get in contact with the procurement ontology people. We would want to have the same URI, but then we need to talk about why their definitions are different. Okay.
Yes.
Emilio, we're running out of time a little bit.
Yeah, go next. This more technical issue, I would say, it's about relations, different type of relations. because DCT relation, well, it's capitalized, but there are three different relations here, which have range either public service or legal resource. There, it's really it's pretty technical, but the idea is to make them a sub-property of a DCT relation in order to distinguish between the different ranges per se, because it's not clear if when we generate the RDF out of it, where DCT relation is used for public service or legal resource. If you agree, we can deal this within GitHub and move to the part of the control vocabulary, which I believe it's more it should be something that we need to deal with this webinar.
Okay. So
I would say that this is not really an issue if we are relying on application profiles, like using Shackle or similar techniques, rather than just RDF schema. This is always the case when you reuse properties across vocabularies, that you may reuse the same one in multiple places. We use that in these terms title, for instance, in DCAT. We have it in catalog, dataset, distribution, data service. It's reused in many places, and it's not considered to be a problem. Why is it considered to be a problem here?
Because in all, you need to know that a CPSV-AP is defined as an all ontology. In all, if you have a relation with the two ranges, the range is defined as the let's say what can I say? The range, let's say, it's supposed to be the same concept, say both public service and the legal resource. It's an and. So unless you specify that the two concepts are completely different.
In RF schema, it's a problem. In OWL, it's not, because then you have property restrictions on all classes. From what I understand, if I don't remember wrong.
Can I just say what the proposal was to discuss this on GitHub?
Yeah.
Because we need to move on.
Okay.
It's indeed a relatively, let's say, small issue, not really on the conceptual level. So these are other type of issues that we are going to solve with the next release. So there were small typos into different concepts concerning datasets, evidence, others, and contact point, or even for in contact point for a certain URI. So this will be indeed the model will be updated to reflect these typos. And we go to the part on the control vocabulary. I think Nathan should be in.
Yes, I'm here with you.
Hello, Nathan. So I hand over to you this part on the control vocabulary.
Thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. For the last part of the content of this webinar, we'll present some of the work that was done on the controlled vocabularies, and more specifically, the controlled vocabulary on the business and life events of those classes in CPSV-AP. And basically, the goal of this part here is to present some of the work that was done, and then give you the opportunity in the next 3 weeks, so for the rest of the month, to provide feedback on this on the list we will propose via GitHub. So, but before we do that, let's see what was done. So, as part of CPSV-AP 2.2.1 a few years ago, a controlled vocabulary was provided for these classes. But since then, some needs have arisen to improve it, but also to align it more with the single digital gateway regulation. And the needs came forward in two ways. One is on GitHub. As you can see on the slide, some issues contained some of the requests regarding this controlled vocabulary. For example, issue 76 on grouping public services by event. Also issue 74 on with the request for a machine-readable description of this recommended controlled vocabulary, because as part of this previous release, it was only included in the documentation as a table, basically, so not as a machine-readable format. And then finally, issue 50 was about the alignment and taking into account these procedures that were listed in the single digital gateway regulation. And next to these issues on GitHub, we also discussed this already in a CPSV-AP webinar in April of this year, where consensus was reached with the working group to basically align the old recommended controlled vocabulary with Annex 2 of the single digital gateway regulation. So we've taken this feedback into account and proposed a first draft of the new version of this controlled vocabulary. And we will not go through the content in this well here today, but I'll just explain shortly what was done and how to interpret the file that you can find on GitHub. I don't know if the link's already in the chat, but I can actually copy it in. So you can find it there. So basically in a spreadsheet, we listed in the middle of the screen, the gray column, we listed the old controlled vocabulary. This is the one that was released under CPSV-AP 2.2.1. And then on the right, the blue column is the live events listed in the Annex 2 on the single digital gateway regulation. And we try to sort of align these two and find a middle ground, taking into account that we don't want to lose information that was previously in the old controlled vocabulary, but also simultaneously including all the live events, or at least modify the wording and the definitions so that they are more interoperable, these two different sources of information. And the result, as it is now, can be seen in the left green column, of which we would like to invite you to go through it and have a look if this suits your needs. And then provide your feedback as usual on the GitHub page as issues, basically. Two more things that we would like to say about this is that the main changes are indicated in red in the green column. So to make it easy for you to see what was changed. So we are talking about the definitions, but also about the first levels of the live events. And a second point related to that is that we also only focused, at least for live events, on those first levels, because the second levels are quite complex and it's very hard to propose an exhaustive list that would suit everyone's needs on a second level. So for now, we decided to align the first levels, and then perhaps at a later stage, depending on the feedback, we can take a look at upgrading the list more. So, and then in the first column, you could also put your feedback there. So it basically can do it on GitHub, but also on the Excel sheet and provide it to us. So are there any questions for now on this, on the setup? And if not, yeah, the list is in the chat, so you can have, but until the end of the month now to provide your feedback there. So there's already a comment from Sebastian that studying can be part of lifelong learning, and it's perhaps not a live event per se. Yeah, this is, I think, also, so basically starting education was part of the old controlled vocabulary, and it is also in the Annex 2 of the single digital gateway regulation. So we didn't really evaluate those types of content, so we didn't omit any concepts or add any conceptually, because of course we don't have power over or we cannot change the single digital gateway regulation live events. But it is a relevant comment that we can also take into account going to the future.
The objective is not only to create this list and propose it to publication office in order to make it machine readable.
Yeah, indeed.
And also to communicate it with the group, the semantics group in the single digital gateway regulation, so that there will be an alignment with those two groups, and then when we have the alignment to send it to the publication office to be published.
Okay, if there's no other comments or questions, I think that was it for this last part of the content of the webinar. So Emidio or...
Yeah, I go next. Well, we wrap up this webinar. I give maybe the floor to Paulina. You see, today we are doing the CPSV-AP. We will continue with the other webinar next. Paulina.
Yes, we as I said earlier during the we have a webinar on DCAT-AP the 25th of November. So we are going to discuss pending things, pending issues along, as well as start the conversation about alignment with the DCAT 3. And you gave us a lot of photo for us, discussing the usage of data set in all vocabularies, and especially in the core criterion and evidences. So this will be one of the subjects that we're going to tackle during our webinar the 26th of January. So please be active and put your comments into GitHub, so that we will have the chance to describe them and how to say, to somehow close the cycle of this alignment and harmonization attempt between the different vocabularies, which, as you see, a lot of things while discussion are raised and are very fruitful for us in order to provide more, as much as we can, stable solutions. So stay tuned for our next webinar on the DCAT-AP. Please provide feedback into GitHub. And thank you very much for attending this webinar. I don't have anything to add. Emilio, Max, would you like to say something before closing?
No, it's okay. Thanks a lot. Indeed, we will take in account all this feedback you provided during this webinar, and then addressing the issues for CPSV-AP.
We wish you
for all the
very
good
pleasant.
preparations.
The presentations are always shared when we have the recordings after each webinar. We are uploading, after some days, we are uploading the presentations along with the audio transcript, the video transcript. So yes, Jevoka, we're going to have it all the material online in the journal page, but we need some time to process them, especially the video recording.
I'm sorry, I just got disconnected, so I'm back on again. So thank you, Pavelina. Thank you,
Thank you all.
Thank you all, and have a good afternoon, and we'll be in touch.
Yes,
Okay.
have a nice afternoon.